Thank you, Ralph. I appreciate that. And I want to thank each and every one of you, because my goal today is that each one of you leave here with something that you didn't have before you walked in this room, that you walk out of here knowing more about who you are and what you're capable of, and just the dreams and desires that you want in your life, and to become more focused in that area of your life. You see, you guys are Villanova students. You come from one of the finest schools in the nation. And there's nothing that you can't do as long as you're coming from your heart and your passion. And so that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about today, because that's what insightful thinking and servant leadership is all about. It's about your passion and your heart, what feeds you, because that will feed your service, and that will feed your mind and the thoughts that come out of your mind. All successful leaders are insightful thinkers. All successful leaders come from their passion, and all successful leaders always look for solutions and new ways to serve. One thing I know for sure, and that is that there is absolutely nothing average about any of you in this room today. Nothing. Just by the very fact that you're participating in the leadership program proves that. And just by the very fact that in spite of the cold, in spite of anything that's going on in your schedule right now, any tests coming up, whatever is happening, you're in this room right now. And that puts you in the top 10% of your class, regardless of your grades. Now, don't get me wrong, I think grades are important. They really are important. But equally important as your grades is your insightful thinking and your willingness to serve and the actions you take in your life. They're equally as important. And so because of that, we're going to be talking about several different people today. But before I even get into that, let me tell you this. I started preparing this message for you back on March the 29th of last year. And why I did that was because you guys are very important to me, and this is very important to me. And it was March the 29th because March the 28th I spoke on this subject last year at the Leadership Academy. And every year that Ralph asked me to do it, I try to make it better and better and better, and I try to get better at delivering it. So my preparation started that long ago because you guys, you have unique gifts, you have unique talents, and you have a voice that's needed in our world today. It's important and it's needed. And let me tell you something about your voice. Because you come from one of the best universities in our country, when you graduate from this university and you say something, people are going to listen to you. They're going to pay attention to what you have to say, and they're going to take you very seriously because you're a Villanova grad. So the question becomes, what and who will you use your voice for when you graduate and you leave this university? And what and who will you use it for now, even while you're here? So what is insightful thinking? What does your voice have to do with that? And what is servant leadership? And how do they fit together? We're going to answer these questions today. And we're going to start with insightful thinking. So we can sit here and we can say, well, what is insightful thinking? And we might say that it's creative thinking. We might say that it's thinking outside of the box. And we might say that it's thinking outside of the circumstances that we're facing. But most importantly, what creative thinking is it's thinking that comes from deep within you. It comes from within. It's not an outside source. It's an inside source that comes out. We live in an inside-out world. It comes from within, and then we express it without. And insightful thinking also comes from the questions that we ask ourselves. Now, when I was at Villanova, you know, some of the questions that I would ask were questions like, how many points is this worth? Or how long does my paper have to be? Or what do I need to know for this test, this upcoming test? And what I realize now is, the quality of the answers that we get is dependent on the quality of the questions that we ask. And I realize now, looking back, that asking those questions rarely, if ever, helped me to get a better grade. And now looking back, I think, and I realize some of the better questions I could have been asking myself was, what concepts do I need to understand that I'm weak in right now? Or what can I write about that'll make this paper come alive for me, that can excite me, that'll make me want to go to the library and do the research that I need, instead of waiting till the last minute and then pulling an all-nighter and then turning in a paper that just doesn't really do much for me. And also, there's always one other question that I try to ask all the time, and that is, what's the bigger picture here? Because there's always a bigger picture. Everything is bigger than just my little circle here in my life. There's always a bigger picture. There's always something bigger that I can look at, no matter what I'm doing or what the circumstance is. Albert Einstein knew this, Thomas Edison knew this, and Martin Luther King knew this. And we're going to look at all three of these guys because they're all perfect examples of insightful thinking and servant leadership. Einstein, when he was thinking about insightful thinking, he may not have used exactly those words, but the way he did it was to think through pictures. He would visualize things and then ask himself questions. And every day when he would go to work after he graduated from school, he would ride a bus, and that bus would take him by this big clock tower. So one day he was approaching that clock tower on his way home, and he started thinking. And the question he asked himself that day was, what if this entire bus was nothing but a particle of light? What if we were traveling at the speed of light? What would that clock tower look like as I'm approaching it, and as I'm there at it, and then when it's behind me? And so he started riding that wave and thinking that thought of what it would look like, and that day was the day that the theory of relativity began to be born. But in creating the theory of relativity and then fighting for 2 years to get it published in the scientific journals of the day, he realized he was going to be taking on 2 centuries of scientific thought. And not only that, but he was also going to be taking on his hero, Sir Isaac Newton. And it took him persistence of 15 years to get his theory of relativity to be proved and accepted. And thus, quantum physics was born, and 200 years of thought was changed. Martin Luther King had to do the same thing. And we're going to talk about that a little more in just a few minutes. But what I want is for you to not underestimate the power of your own mind. You can do the same things that Einstein did, and King, and Thomas Edison. It all comes, everything that, from then forward, always, everything is always a thought before it ever becomes a thing. It's a thought before it ever becomes an action. Everything in this room, the tables that are in front of you, the chairs you're sitting in, the clothes that we wear, it was a thought before it ever became a thing. And we all know this. We realize this at some level that, yeah, things have to be thought before we can create them. But we forget the power of knowing this and recognizing that our thoughts can be that powerful, that our thoughts can become something real and tangible in our world. In our country, just like Einstein came up against 200 years of thought, we have to do the same thing. Every system, there's not a system in government that we can talk about that isn't either broken or struggling, completely broken or struggling. We can talk about, healthcare, education, the government itself, housing, the judicial system, politics, and our environment. Everything is struggling. We've got to come up with new answers. And the problem is, I can go back as far as Nixon, they always come up with some of the same stuff, cutbacks or more spending or less spending. It's always the same answers every year from Nixon, Carter, Ford, all the way to the present. And it never gets any better. It's consistently over the years gotten worse and worse and worse and worse because we're all still working within the same system that was created 200 years ago when our country was young. But just like the things in your life that worked in your life when you were children, when you were young, they don't work for you today. You've grown up. You've matured. And so the things that worked for you as a child don't work for you today. Well, as a country, we've grown up. And the things that worked for us back then don't work anymore. And we've got to come up with new ways and new solutions, better and sustainable solutions, because our problems aren't just in our country, they're global. And so usually what we come up with is going to affect the entire nation, the entire world. Now, Albert Einstein recognized these problems way back in the 1940s and 1950s, and he back then was trying to get people to start thinking outside of the box. He said, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting different results, and that's what we do every single year in this country, as far as the government and housing and all those other things are concerned. We're still inside the box, doing the same things over and over and over again. We're expecting different results, and we're not getting them, and everything keeps just getting worse and worse and worse. But we're at a precipice now. Something has got to change. We've got to fix it, or it's all going to come crumbling down around us. We don't know what that date is, but it becomes more and more obvious all the time. But this is not something to be afraid of, because we can fix it. There's nothing I'm talking about that's not fixable. Einstein said that the world we created is a product of our thinking. It cannot be changed without changing our thinking. And he said, I don't know what happened to my slides here. We cannot solve our problems with the same level of thinking that created them. Oh, there we go. All right. We have to change our thinking. We can't stay in the same thinking that created the problems, and that's what we've been doing year after year after year, ever since I can remember. We've got to become flexible and reinvent ourselves in ways that are self-sustainable. Let me jump forward here. Rabbi Heschel said, in every moment there's something sacred at stake. And I love that quote, because every moment we can choose to be awake and aware and to see what's going on around us and take responsibility for it, or we can let it slide by us. The choice is in our control. We can decide, somebody else can do something about it, or the government will do something about it, or we cannot wait. We can stand up and we can decide to take responsibility. It's the same as at some point we reach a point in our lives where we have to start blaming our parents for what they did and didn't do, or anybody around us, our siblings or other people in our schools and stuff like this, and we have to start taking responsibility for our own lives. And the day we do that is the day we become free. There's real freedom in that. I can't express how much freedom there is in that. It's the same thing in our country. There's freedom in taking responsibility and not waiting for somebody else to do something about it. What if Martin Luther King had taken that attitude, the government will fix it, somebody else will do something? Back in 1954, the Supreme Court ruled that segregation in schools was unconstitutional. That was 1954. In 1964, even though it was against the law and unconstitutional, education was still segregated. And I grew up in the South. I know I was in a segregated school. It wasn't, and Martin Luther King, he did not sit back and say, the government will fix it. He started working well before that, way back in 1954 when it became unconstitutional. He was standing up for the rights of people everywhere. And still in 64, it hadn't happened yet, but in 1965, they closed the black schools in Arkansas, where I grew up, and the black kids came into our school, but it took 11 years. And that's what I mean. We can't wait. What if Martin Luther King had waited? Well, then it wouldn't have happened in '64, but he didn't wait. He stood up, and he got other people to stand up with him and helped change come along, because if it was left up to the government, especially the governments in the South, then it never would have happened. Albert Einstein said, humanity is going to require a substantially new way of thinking if it's to survive. That's what King offered. That's what Thomas Edison offered. That's what everybody who's a successful leader offers, is a new way of thinking so that we can survive. Einstein said, imagination is more important than knowledge. Knowledge is limited, but imagination circles the world. See, imagination, it points out what we might yet discover or even create. Imagination, Einstein called it the highest form of research. He said, imagination is the most marvelous, or actually that wasn't Einstein, this is Napoleon Hill said, imagination is the most marvelous, miraculous, inconceivable, powerful force that the world has ever known. And that is so true, because everything begins with our imagination. Everything that Edison, Einstein, and Martin Luther King did was to solve a problem or to serve others, and they used their imagination while doing it, and then they stepped in to servant leadership. Dr. King was once quoted as saying, "He who is greatest among you shall be your servant." Then he went on to say, if we give greatness that definition, it means that everybody can be great, because everybody can serve. You don't have to have a college degree to serve. You don't have to make your own subject and verb agree to serve. And you don't have to know about Plato or Aristotle to serve. You don't have to know Einstein's theory of relativity to serve. You only need a heart full of grace, so generated by love, and you can be that servant. That is servant leadership. Albert Pike said, what we have done for ourselves alone dies with us, but what we have done for others and the world remains and is immortal. And think about this. The things that King did, the things that Einstein did, the things that Edison did, the things that the Wright brothers did, the things that Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and Jeff Bezos, all these guys, still alive today. Martin Luther King's words are still as relevant today and still ringing in the ears of people, even though he died years and years and years ago. We were each born with gifts and talents and abilities. And expressing our talents and our gifts is very important. And here's the thing, whether you express them or whether you don't, your choices will change the world. Think about that for a second. Whether you express your gifts and your talents or not, it's going to change the world. Just by living and breathing, you're making a difference in one way or the other. The question is, are you creating by default or are you creating by design? You see, when you express your gifts and your talents and you speak up and you use your voice, you're creating by design. When you sit back and you stay silent, you're creating by default. And the world cries out of the lack of not hearing your voice and not receiving your gifts, not receiving your talents. And then we just do nothing but create the same old, and settle for whatever shows up. And that choice is ours. And if you think you're not good enough, if that may be one of the reasons why we step back and we don't do it, we question our abilities and we say, oh, I'm not good enough to do this, somebody else would be better at it than me. I want you to realize something. 85 to 95% of the population of the world suffers from that very thought. right there. And that's global. That's not just here in the States. It's everywhere. We all struggle with that. I struggle with that. Who am I to stand up here and talk to you guys? You know, that could be a question. And, you know, it's scary being up here. It really is. But I'm not going to let that stop me from expressing my heart and telling you what I believe and let you see by my example, just as King did, just as Einstein did, just as everyone that's done in leadership. Standing up, not letting our perceived weaknesses stop us. Because you're no different than anybody else. We all struggle with it. Even Steve Jobs, everybody else, there's not a person you can't think about that's got a big name, that's achieved great things. They can tell you about their struggles right there of who am I to do this. So one of the guys that struggled with this, along with everybody else, was Neil Armstrong. You know, and yet he ended up being an astronaut and the first person to walk on the moon. And he said those immortal words, that's one small step for man and one giant leap for mankind. But just like that historic walk on the moon, every great achievement begins with just a small step. Now back in 1969 when he did that, the population of the world, of the United States, was 202 million people. Now I'm going to tell you a bizarre little story right now. It's bizarre, I admit it, you know, but stick with me because at the end of this story it's going to make perfect sense and it might be one of your favorite stories to ever been told. Okay, so stick with me on it. If we take that population of the United States, 202 million, and we put them all in one spot, and you are numbered among that 202 million, okay? Just imagine that. And imagine that now you're being asked, all 202 million are asked to run a race. And not just any race, but a marathon, 26.2 miles you got to run. And everybody really wants to win this race in the worst way. Now here's the bizarre part. You want to win in the worst way because the winner gets to live. Everybody else dies. That's the bizarre part, okay? But hang in with me for a second. So here you are and you think, well then I really want to live. So I got to win this race. So the best thing to do is to just get out in front and get in that number one position and stay there through the whole race. And boom, the gun goes off. You weren't ready, you weren't prepared, but by golly, you got to start running. So you take off and you run and you run and you're running as fast as you can and everything. And you're trying to get out in front, but there's people in front of you and you're battling. And you get through mile 1 and mile 2 and mile 3 and finally in mile 4, you break through and you take over that number one position. And so you're running as fast as you think you can, and you think, I've got to keep running as fast as I can so I can stay in this number one spot. And then mile 5 comes along, and you're still running as fast as you can, and mile 6, but they're still running as fast as they can behind you, so you can't let up. And you think, I hope they start slowing down soon so I can, because I don't think I can do this for 26.2 miles. You know, mile 7, mile 8, mile 9, and you're still having to run as fast as you can because you've got to maintain this spot right out in front. Mile 10, mile 11, mile 12, now things are starting to hurt, but you're still running, and now you're going uphill, and boy, uphill is really tough, but you got to keep going, you got to keep running as fast as you can, because you want to win. So you keep going, and you keep going, mile 13, mile 14, mile 15, now things are really starting to hurt, breathing is getting more difficult, your knees are starting to hurt, but you look back and there's still some people back there and they're running as fast as they can, so you can't let up and you think, I can't keep doing this for 26 miles, somebody's got to slow down. But they're not, and so you keep going, now you're at mile 20, 21, and 22, now things are really starting to hurt, your ankles are hurting, your knees are hurting, your hips are hurting, it's hard to breathe, you can't get your breath, your arms are tired of moving, but you got to keep going, you're going as fast as you can because you really, really want to win. So now you're at mile 24 and mile 25, and you're thinking, I've got to stop, I've got to slow down. I don't think I can last to the 26th mile. But you look back, and there's still some there, and so you just keep going, and then finally you reach mile 26, and now you see the end, you see the tape, and you realize, okay, I've got a shot here, I've got to speed up, I've got to go faster, but my legs just won't go any faster, so I just keep going. I look back, and I see there's maybe 100 people behind me. You see that, and you think, wow. But what you guys don't realize is that everybody else of that 202 million, they were all running just as fast as they could too, trying to catch up to you, and their bodies just couldn't take it, and they all died all along the path because their bodies just gave out completely. And there's only about 100 of you that are still alive and right there in the vicinity to even win this race. And so you keep going as fast as you can. You're trying to speed up, but your legs won't go, but you just keep going. Everything hurts. And finally you break that tape. You won the race and you throw up your arms and you say, I won! I get to live! Now the thing about this race is that it's real. And not only is it real, but it already happened. You see, just over 200 million sperm went racing toward one egg. Most of the sperm, all in this uphill battle to get to the egg, died all along the path. And only about 100 even get into the vicinity of the egg. But one little lone sperm got to that egg, and 9 months later, each and every one of you were born. And the reason I tell you this story, and you're sitting here and you're laughing, it is a funny story, but the reason I tell you this story is because there's a very important principle here. That means that each and every one of you are the best of 202 million, of over 200 million. You were the very best. You were born into this world a champion. We all came into this world as champions against astronomical odds. And that was your start. And then we promptly come into this world and we forget that we're champions, that we're incredible beings, capable of doing incredible things. So live from your heart and don't settle. You're a champion. Don't settle. You were made of the same stuff as Jeff Bezos, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Leonardo da Vinci, if you're into art, any musician that you love, Thomas Edison, the Wright brothers, if you're into avionics, everyone. You were made of that same stuff. And if you think, oh no, I'm too small to be that great, let me tell you something. We've all got greatness in us. Actually, I don't know what's happened to my slides here, but I'm just going to roll with it. If you think you're small, if you think you're too small to have any kind of impact in the world, let me tell you something. Try going to bed with a mosquito in the room. Mosquito is a little tiny thing, and yet that mosquito will drive you nuts as the big thing that you are. You're not too small. You were just as important and just as capable as Jeff Bezos, as anybody that you can mention that you respect and hold in high regard in your interests, whether it be music or in whatever your studies are, in engineering or whatever they are. You're just as important as anyone else on this planet. You came in this world a champion. See, there's two things that can change your life. Either something new comes into your life or something new comes out of you. And that new that comes out of you is insightful thinking. Trying to decide where I want to go from here since this is all messed up. I don't know what I did here with my slides. Let me see what happens. There's that one. We'll start right there. So what is insightful thinking? Well, this guy, Joe Vitale, says, for insightful thinking, how do we create it? Well, you want to become aware of your thoughts. You want to choose your thoughts carefully, and you want to have fun with it because you are the masterpiece of your own life. Remember, it all starts with your own thoughts and comes out from there as you create it. So how do we do that? Well, let's look at Einstein. Einstein thought in pictures. He would visualize things. He would then ask himself questions and go from there. This is Edison, Thomas Edison. Edison had what they call his naps. He would just lay down on a workbench in his laboratory, and he would lay there and he would ask himself, what is a problem in society that I can think of right now? And then he would think, what can I do to solve that problem? And then he would come up with these amazing inventions. And he holds the record for a number of inventions by one single person. and changed our lives in many ways today. There's so many areas of our lives that are different just because of this man right here and the inventions that he created just by doing that, laying down and asking himself, what's a problem in society and how can I fix it? What can I do to fix it? In his lunch breaks, everybody else would come out of the lab. They would sit around, read papers, talks. He would lay down and think, and ask himself those questions. And then he would get together with his friends, Henry Ford there on the right and Harvey Firestone on the left, and then just bounce ideas off of each other and make things even greater, create even more just by stimulating one another with their thoughts and their insightful thinking. Ralph Waldo Emerson said, what lies behind us and what lies before us are tiny matters compared to what lies within us. And that is so true. Within us is such raw potential, such capabilities that we aren't even aware of yet. So if I had to make a suggestion, I would say pursue anything and everything that interests you, because nothing is ever wasted. Any class you ever take, if you think, oh, I'll never use this, don't say that. You never know, because you've got a full life to live. And I'm telling you, just based on past experience, my own experience, nothing you ever study or learn is ever wasted. One thing I was interested in was flying. And so I started taking flying lessons, thinking I was going to be a pilot and make my living that way. But then I soon realized, after I think about 6 months, that this was just going to become an expensive hobby, because I didn't want to make my life, my living by flying. I realized it wasn't a real passion. But one thing I got away from, took away from flying, among the many things, was what's called an attitude indicator in the aircraft. And that's it right there, attitude indicator. That attitude indicator tells the pilot what he's flying in relation to ground, whether it's nose straight and level, nose up to ground, nose down, banking off to the right or banking off to the left. And you can see all the little pictures of that right there. Now, if you're flying what's called visual flight rules instead of instrumental flight rules, VFR, then you've got to pay attention to this guy, this little guy. And I'll give you an example of that. If we were going to fly from here to Scottsdale, Arizona, and let's say it takes us 6 hours to do, and we're flying visual flight rules, if we allow just a slight little bank to the left on our way to Scottsdale, Arizona, and we don't notice it, no, I'm only talking maybe at most a degree of a bank, and because you're not going to feel that much of a bank, you're not going to feel it. The only way you would know it is by looking at your attitude indicator. If we allowed that all the way from here for that 6 hours to land in Scottsdale, Arizona, guess what? That tiny little change, by the time we got to where we're supposed to be and we're looking down and looking for Scottsdale, Arizona, we would discover that we're in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada, just because of that one little slight degree. Well, see, in our lives, our attitude is a composite of our thoughts and our feelings and our actions. And I say this because if you just make a small little tweak to a thought, a small little tweak to your habits or actions, it can make a huge difference where you end up 6 months from now, 5 years now, and 10 years from now. Just a slight little difference. So you only have to make slight little changes to create huge results in your life. So let's give you an example of challenging these thoughts, these paradigms that we have. We've all heard that question, is this glass half full or half empty? You can look at that glass and answer that question to yourself. You don't even have to say anything. Is it half empty or half full? Now I want to ask you, why did you answer the way you answered, half empty or half full? Why did you answer that way? What if that glass is broken? Are we doomed because the glass is broken? See, the thing about this is, that's all the paradigm. Why do we have to say half empty or half full? Why can't we think outside that box and say that glass is refillable? And not only is it refillable, but it's changeable. We can change it. Make it a bigger glass, a better glass, a smaller glass. We got to get out of these paradigms, out of these little things that we're stuck in. And realize that we're not prisoner to our circumstances either. One of my favorite poems is this poem by Ella Wilcox Wheeler. It says, "One ship sails east and another west, by the selfsame winds that blow. 'Tis the set of the sails and not the gales that tells the wind the way we go. Like the winds of the sea or the waves of time as we journey along through life. 'Tis the set of the soul that determines the goal, and not the calm or the strife." So the winds don't matter, the circumstances don't matter. It's how we set our sails. It's how Martin Luther set his sails in spite of all the winds and circumstances. It's how Einstein and anybody else set their sails that determines the way that we go. We're not stuck. We're creative beings, and we're champions. It's choice, not chance, that determines our destiny. It's choice, not chance, that determines what we create in our lives. There's no passion to be found in playing small, in settling for a life that's less than the one that you are capable of living as a champion that you came in this world to be. Henry David Thoreau said, "If a man will advance confidently in the direction of his dreams and live the life that they have imagined, they will meet with success, unexpected in common hours." Things will just happen if you just advance confidently in the direction of your dream. Just step out boldly. Things happen to support you and to help you. Leonardo da Vinci said, "It had long since come to my attention that people of accomplishment rarely sat back and just let things happen to them. They went out and they happened to things." That's what we want to do, and that's what Martin Luther King did. So there's two primary choices. We can either accept conditions as they are, or we can accept the responsibility for changing them. And that's what Martin Luther King did. And I want to talk a little bit about the qualities of leadership that he exhibited as a servant leader. First of all, King was willing to show up and step up when most people weren't. He wanted to be a preacher and teach theology at a university. Instead, he ended up the father of the civil rights movement. In his own words, he said, "I was thrust into it." He didn't choose it. He just was thrust into it because he chose to stand up. He chose to show up where most people wouldn't. Quality two, he was willing to take responsibility for finding answers instead of just letting it, saying somebody else will do it or somebody else will do it. No, I'm going to do it. I'm going to take up the responsibility for finding the answer. Now, these qualities I'm talking about, he wasn't born with them. He learned them. We all learn them as we step up and step into leadership. We learn. And so every one of these qualities, if there's one of them that you're weak in, don't worry about it. You can learn it. It all comes with stepping up and stepping out and believing and coming from your heart. Quality three was courage. In spite of everything, he always knew that something bigger was at stake, something bigger than him. And so he went against dogs, batons, spitting, fire hoses, even arrest. He stood up in courage to serve. He learned from his mistakes. He wasn't perfect. Every time he made a mistake, he learned from it, and he got better and better and better as time went on. He stayed focused no matter what happened around him, no matter what the circumstances did, no matter the bomb threats, no matter anything. He stayed focused and committed to his vision. He gave total dedication in spite of those bomb threats, in spite of the fact that he knew he could be killed. He stood up in total dedication. Quality seven. He rallied the people. He didn't try to do it all himself. He rallied the people and he trained the people. He didn't just say, "Hey, let's go do this." He trained them. He helped them to respond in love instead of swinging a fist when the fist was swung at them. He rallied the leaders of the time too, not just the people, but the leaders. He got other leaders to join him, and when other leaders asked him to come and help them, he went. Quality nine, he was well educated. He had a BA and he had a PhD, but even more than that, he didn't let a single day go by without reading something that fed his heart and fed his mind and helped him to grow and become better than he was the day before. Quality 10, he was creative. He used insightful thinking to articulate himself, create speeches, write sermons, and write books. Quality 11, he was flexible. He always had to respond to the circumstances, not react, but respond to the circumstances and change his plans as things cropped up and needed to be changed. So he remained flexible and he remained patient. Remember, it took from 54 to 65 just for the schools to become unsegregated in Arkansas. It took 11 years for that to happen, so patience was a huge quality that he had to exhibit. 13 was determination. Never give up and never quit in spite of all the things, the bomb threats, everything that came against him. He never gave up and he never quit. Neither did Thomas Edison and neither did Einstein when they went up against their struggles. Edison to create the light bulb, Einstein for his theory of relativity. Number 14, he had great conviction and he believed that what he was doing was the thing that needed to be done. And he would stand up, and he came up against 150 years of segregated thinking. That's what King stood up to, 150 years of segregated thinking. And not just in people, but the government of the South. But yet, he stood in his conviction, and he stood in his determination, his patience, his flexibility, and he stood in quality number 15, truth, coming from his heart. Always expressing the truth, always expressing his heart. And quality 16, being very genuine. He never asked anyone to do anything that he wasn't willing to do himself, and in fact did do himself. Quality 17 was high self-esteem. In spite of everything that he grew up with, he grew up being told that he had a bad heritage, that he had the wrong color skin, bad skin, that he was mentally weak and he was a second-class citizen. That's what he was told. But he says, no, I'm not any of that. I have a beautiful heritage, he said. I've got a great color of skin. And I'm going to stand up for the truth of who I am. And every time he took a step in that direction, his self-esteem rose. And every time people with him took a step in that direction, their self-esteem arose and got higher and higher. Our self-esteem can grow and get better as we take action. And even in our failures, because failures only make us stronger. They show us something we didn't know before, and then we do it better the next time. Quality 18 is he had dignity. And he didn't let anybody talk him down. He had dignity, and he didn't say, we've got to change the world. He said, no, I'm going to be the change that I want to see in the world. And that's what he did. He stood up being what he wanted to see in the world. Martin Luther King, through servant leadership and insightful thinking, brought hope and healing to America. And he taught timeless values of courage and truth and justice and compassion, dignity, humility, and service. And those things still ring out today. So, in the idea and the spirit of servant leadership and insightful thinking, we can simply ask ourselves a few questions, and you might want to write some of these questions down because they can help you and guide you the answer to these questions. First question is, what do you really want? What do you want to do with your life? What do you want to be? What do you want to create? What's your heart screaming out to express and say? And then realize you have infinite potential. Everything that you're writing down on your piece of paper to that question of what do I really want, you have the potential within you to create it, to let it grow out of you through insightful thinking and through service. So, then the next question becomes, what am I doing for others then? If I want to be a servant leader, what am I doing for others today, tomorrow, every day? I try to ask myself that. What am I doing for others? And what is my life the answer to? I try to ask myself that every day, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 times a day. What is my life the answer to? What can I offer you today? What can I be that can make your life a little bit better? That can make my life a little bit better because I'm making your life better. And where do we go from here? Now that I have this understanding, now that I have this realization, where do we go from here? What do I do about this? What am I going to do? What am I going to be? How am I going to help? Goethe, he said, these are two of my most favorite quotes of all. He said, at the moment of commitment, the entire universe conspires to assist you. And that is so true. Every time at the moment of commitment, I have discovered, when I decide I'm going to do something or try to become something or be something or create something, people just show up, you know, I bump into somebody. Things happen that support the thing that I'm wanting to achieve, the thing that I'm wanting to do. Goethe said, what you can do or dream that you can do, begin it, because boldness has genius, power, and magic in it. I love that quote, and it is so true. Just step up in boldness, because there's genius, power, and magic in it. The magic happens, the people come, everything you need comes in to support you to achieve it. I want to finally close by just saying this. Servant leadership and insightful thinking go hand in hand. When you put the two of them together, there's nothing you can't do or be or achieve. So go out there. Remember, you are a champion. You were born a champion. You came into this world to be and do great things. So grow, learn, stretch yourselves by living outside of your comfort zone. Challenge these 200 years of thought that have now become obsolete, that we need to grow into because we've evolved. We're bigger than that now. Change our world as effective leaders of change by using your insightful thinking and your servant heart and your marvelous, marvelous creative mind. Go out there, marrying these things together, servant heart, insightful thinking, and change the world. It's within you.